Hello and welcome to Gender Nebulous. Today we have a special guest all the way from Australia, Kirsti Miller. Welcome, Kirsti.
Welcome.
Thank you, Vicky and Frida. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, we've been excited to get you on the show. I mean, it's really, modern technology. You're in Australia, we're in Great Britain, and yet we can do this. It's amazing.
It's just brought the whole world together, I'm amazed with technology. For an old girl, I just still can't get out of how we can do this.
Yeah, it's like, since COVID came along, we've all had to learn how to do this, haven't we? It's been...
Yeah, and I actually like this, it opens up a whole world, I think this is the future.
It is.
Just wish we had your weather here.
Yeah, it's the middle of winter out here. It's a bit snowy outside. You've probably got nice hot weather.
It's been absolutely perfect out here in Broken Hill this summer. Yeah, beautiful.
So, Kirsti, you're in Wagga Wagga in Broken Hill, aren't you, Australia, New South Wales?
I'm actually in Broken Hill. I'm originally from Wagga Wagga, but now I live in Broken Hill, which is outback New South Wales. Broken Hill's the home of the Royal Flying Doctor Service.
Oh, right.
It's the home of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and it's the home of Mad Max and the home of Kirsti Miller 30.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we know a little bit about you, Kirsti. We know you're an accomplished athlete and you've got quite a lot of history. So would you like to tell us, for the people watching, a bit more about yourself and a bit of your history?
Yeah. Well, I describe myself as a transgender woman, and I am a surgically transition woman, something that I did about 17 years ago, and I'm about 23 years into my journey as Kirsti. Up until that stage, my first day as a woman was actually walking into my jail that I was the governor of as a woman. Wow. I went home one day as Warren and went back the next day as Kirsti, and that was 23 years ago. Prior to that, I was to the outside world, a married man, a father of three, a former world champion and dual international athlete. But up until the year 2000, that was just a shield that I had for my life to survive.
That sounds like a tough job. Sounds like a tough job to come out in.
I came out as Kirsti in the jail in 2000. That was, the day that everything in my life just changed.
So is that when were you into athletics from a young age, or was that something about the same time as?
Yeah, well, there was three things in life that I was passionate about from about 3 or 4 years of age. One of them was sport. I played my first game of sport at about 4.5, the game of rugby league, and scored quite a few tries in my first game and excelled, like in every sport, every ball I touched or every bat I picked up, or when I started swimming, I just took it to water like a fish, and so, from an young age, I just competed in everything I could compete in. Represented my state, my first sport, at 12 years of age, and went on and represented Australia in a couple of sports. But sports been my whole life, and my whole life pre and post transition. The other thing from about that age was my transgender stuff. And I can remember a particular day at about 3.5 years of age when my father, for a joke, dressed me in a little yellow dress and held me above his head and took me out to a family barbecue and held me above his head, and everyone laughed and made fun of me. But I knew back then I was a girl, so that actually incident at 3.5 years of age evolved into a reoccurring nightmare for about the next 30 years of my life. Right. Every single night I went to bed, I had this nightmare. People laughing at me. And the other thing I was very keen on and interested on was, from 3.5 years of age, 4 years of age, was prisons. And the reason because of that was not because I was a little criminal, because I used to drive past this big jail when I used to go visit my nan like every couple of months. And my dad, I'd say, "What's that there?" And he'd say, "That's where naughty men." And he'd never tell me anything about it. So when you're a child and you're not told something and it's like a secret, you want to learn about it. So I learned about jails.
Interesting,
Yeah, so that was probably the three passions in my life: being trans, being an athlete, and working in the prisons. And
so, how did you get into being a prison guard? I mean, how did that happen?
I was at the time working in on the railways, the New South Wales Railway, as the overhead electrical line worker, and just not far from my hometown, announced they were going to build a new prison, and I looked at the opportunities for employment, like good money in that job, and I was just a married husband at that time with young kids, so money was an option. I was very interested in that, obviously, to get into either corrections or working for the police and that type of thing. So it just opened up, and I went for the job and ended up getting appointed to Goulburn, the hardest jail in Australia. That was my first ever, my first ever posting, and I ended up working at a lot of jails all around New South Wales. I progressed through the ranks.
You must have seen a lot of things.
Yeah, well, I actually hold the record for the most successful escape attempt in New South Wales corrections history. I was responsible for that, and that was my very first day working on the job. I lost 26 inmates on my first day.
Wow, that's not a good start.
Yeah, but I caught one.
Is that why you're now? Well, is that why now you're known as the toughest prison guard in Australia? Is that why, because of that event?
No, I was renowned. I was always renowned as being a very tough prison officer, but a very, very fair prison officer, you know. And I was very consistent in the way I performed my duties, and testament to that would have been shown that since I've been out of the job about 17 years now, I've never been abused by a former inmate. I was never abused for being trans by an inmate when I changed, because I had the respect. I treated everyone with respect from day one, whether they be staff or inmates. You know, I went in there to that job to be a correctional officer, to help correct people's behaviour and attitudes and stuff. So, you know, if you go into that job with the right attitude, you can be, you know, and you can help society. If you go in there as a prison officer and you want to be judge, jury, and executioner, well, if I had any of those people working for me, I got rid of them. I sacked them. You know, so I didn't allow corruption one bit in my workplace. Yeah.
And then you became...
So, and I was very fortunate that I actually helped develop the world's first policy for transgender inmates in New South Wales, Australia, back about 21 years ago.
Wow.
So how did
still,
that
I believe, world's
work
best
then?
practice
What
today.
was the policy?
That policy there was basically you didn't have to have the gender official gender change. It was assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Which it is in any correctional jurisdiction anyway. Yeah. So when a trans inmate comes into custody, say in New South Wales, Australia, that inmate straight away has to be held separately. And there's a special unit down in Sydney at Silverwater Jail that does risk assessment on each trans inmate. And that risk assessment involves looking at the offence that they're currently housed for, the previous offence history, their previous compliance with either community service orders, their history of violence, whatever, against women, the length of their sentence, their health status, a number of things, you know. And it's not just for trans inmates, it's for every single inmate. It's no harder to manage a trans woman inmate than any other woman inmate. It's totally not, you know. It's risk management.
You're sort of covering two of the main subjects that come up in the sort of anti-trans discussions. Is like they bring up prisons a lot and they bring up sports a lot. So it's good that you can give us that perspective.
Those are the two big topics, can't we? Transgender people in sports, transgender people in prisons. Those are like the two big topics.
I've worked behind the walls of Australia's most hardened jails, you know, both male and female. And I can tell you the most feared inmate in the New South Wales prison system wasn't the serial killer Ivan Milat or the serial killer John Wayne Glover, aka the Granny Killer, and it wasn't even the Murphy brothers or the most dangerous inmate in New South Wales corrections is a cisgender woman, Rebecca Butterworth, who stabbed a fellow inmate 33 times. So, you know, there's a lot of irrational fears, particularly in England, about this stuff. Yeah. This
well, with the debate, the debate becomes weaponized. So yeah,
it's been weaponized.
So I was just going to say about because a lot of the times when people talk about trans women in prison, there are people that think men are identifying as trans or as women so they can get an easier ride in prison. But that doesn't seem to make any sense to me, because if you're already in the correctional system, who's going to take you seriously then? You know, it's like, would that be something you would think as realistic? Or,
well, say an example now in the prison system in New South Wales, and I know it's similar in Scotland and England as well, but an inmate's quite entitled, and like every community's got really bad people, right? So there's a lot of serial killer, axe murderer, cisgender people, thousands of them, right? There's very few transgender ones, right? But we've got a couple, right? But if these people are in custody now, right, and this is what happens now, this is what happens in these fictional scenarios now, right? So if an inmate comes in that's a serial killer that's killed 7 women, like there was one in Australia, that Paul Denyer, that's now identifies as Paula, wanted to become a woman, but it didn't automatically let Paula now go to a women's jail. They had to look at Paula's, like, what they're in jail for now, which is violence, serial killer against women. So they're not going to the women's jail, you know. Yeah. So the most that someone in a men's jail, if they want to play the system and they've got all this criminal history and that, and they've got no history of being trans and that behind them, right, they're not going to get past the first base. They are not going to get past the first base. So, you know, we can't punish every single transgender person in the world because there might be a couple of bad actors. And those bad actors get found out in the system, you know. The system is not automatically put my hand up, I'm a girl, I'm going to the girls' prison tomorrow. That doesn't happen. It won't happen. So and as a trans person and a former prison governor, I would jump up and down if that did happen.
That's good to know. Yeah.
So is that that's kind of like the risk assessment that when someone comes into the prison system?
It happens for every single inmate. You do a security risk assessment, and then you do every inmate every 6 months normally has a placement assessment or a classification assessment, and they're all related to the same things: what they're in jail for, the previous offence history, their age, their health history, their compliance, blah, 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 blah. The same security stuff. Not whether they're trans or cisgender, but whether they're trans or cisgender, then they can look. But there's people saying, like, how do you live in the gender of your assumed gender, you know? How do you live in that role? Well, there's, like, if we get a trans woman coming into custody and this trans woman's obviously been on hormones, they can show that they've been on hormones, they show that they've had a name change or whatever. There's all examples of how they've already changed and lived as that gender in society by providing this evidence and that to us. So it's an individual risk assessment. Talking about us as a monolithic community in any of these subjects, it is just so backward. It's going back to talking about gays as a group or African-American gangs and all this type of crap, you know?
Well, yeah, it seems to be the lobby groups in the UK that push these kind of, because you've got like 4 Women Scotland, and you've got Fair Play for Women, and they always come across as if they're being some kind of feminist group, but actually they're not. They're just looking for instances where they can exclude trans women, and that is the main focus. But they dress it up as a kind of, they're trying to protect women's rights. They're actually, I always say they're looking the wrong way, because if they were trying to protect women's rights, they wouldn't be looking at trans people. They'd be looking at systemic misogyny, the misogyny built into the system already.
Well, you never see Fair Play for Women advocating for greater representation of females in the sports media, or greater representation on, senior boards and more funding and more research for women, and talking about the negative attitudes against women athletes. Like people like Fair Play for Women and Sharron Davies, all they've done for the last 7-8 years is tell women all over the world that not only that you'll never beat a boy or a man, you'll never beat a transgender woman that's had no testosterone for up to 20 years in the body. Like they're absolutely putting crap on cisgender women more so than what they are trans women athletes.
Yeah,
I've
never seen
negatively about both groups of us, you know.
Yeah, so I've never seen Sharron Davies say anything positive really about, grassroots girls' sports. So if you cared about women's sports, perhaps that's where you should be putting your energies, because it's so like women's sport is very underfunded, and that's another factor.
And I honestly believe that the biggest reason we still have this around 10% gender gap in performance, and more so in some strength sports, is not due to testosterone and not due to biology. It's due to the negative attitudes against, like, every woman, every child, every girl that's born, we tell them they can't beat boys, you know, and the imbalance in funding, but there's some negative attitudes. It's absolutely negative, and the negative attitudes that fair play for women, Sharron Davies, this Riley Gaines, all these, and they're all blonde women. They're all blonde women coming out saying this. Like, you don't get many, African American anti-trans athletes. They're all blonde women, and mainly blonde women from two countries, America and the USA, which have got two of the biggest histories of women's doping in sport. Like, sometimes people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Like Sharron Davies competed in the drug era. Like, who's clean from there? We don't know.
Yeah, that'd be hard to prove. But, I mean, I do look at Sharron Davies, and she's quite a large woman. She's quite broad-shouldered. She's got, she's tall. If you're a tall swimmer, that gives you an advantage. That was the point.
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. And like, she would massively, if they put Sharron Davies and myself in a lab, we're both about the same age, okay? If they put us in a lab and did our hemoglobin checks, did EPO checks, did bone mineral density checks, muscle mass checks, height, weight, Sharron Davies would smash me. And I could take her to any sports law or court, and there's no way that she could possibly say that I've got a physical advantage. I can clearly show on a case-by-case basis that she would smash me. So, yeah. And she's had probably more surgery than most trans women I know as well. So, and Botox. So, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Yeah, well, they always show that photo of, the swimmer Leah Thomas. Yeah, and they always have that photo of how tall Leah looks in comparison to the other girls. But if you put Sharron Davies in that photo in the same frame, then you would see the same disparity.
Kate Ledecky is the same height, and Kate Ledecky is 10 seconds faster. When Leah won that NCAA national title, her winning time was 9.4 seconds slower than the actual record. That's nearly a full 25-yard lap. Like, that is massive. So
but they try to portray it as though she's winning everything. Like, Leah Thomas is going in there and she's invading women's sports and she's taking over because they portray it as that this person is spoiling the sport because they're winning everything. But we don't see that in reality, do we?
No, absolutely don't. Actually, Leah Thomas was a perfect example to show that how having her in the sport actually improved the sport. It like, you never see these NCAA women's swimming events ever get any media coverage, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And the competition was so close in that, like you said, she only won that one event, and her winning time was slower than the two previous winning times of that event. There's high school girls in America that have swam faster over that distance in the same time last year. So it actually showed that it was very competitive. There was no unfair advantage whatsoever. And you've got to think, Leah was on this treatment for 2.5 years when she competed. Leah, and I see a lot of these anti-trans people are saying she went from 550th. She did, but that was after she'd already been on hormones. Before Leah started hormone treatment, as a first year in college, she was a top 10 time in America and a top 100 in a couple of other times. And that was just like a 16-year-old. And you get faster as you get older as a male swimmer. Leah started hormone treatment about 18, around 20 and a half, now 21. Leah's going to continue to get slower every year. Within about another 2 years, Leah's body will have broken down that much as an athlete that she will not even be able to compete or train. Her energy levels and recovery rates will be non-existent. So as the competitors get faster, leader's going to continue to get slow. This is why we see very short careers of trans women in sport. Their careers are very short because androgen deprivation has a bit of a window period for a few years, and then bang, and then eventually you end up like me, with osteoporosis and complete muscle atrophy and lung diseases. And so it's a very short window period.
Just on that point about HRT treatment and how it kind of affects elite athletes over time like that. Is that when you've suppressed your testosterone for a long period of time? Because as an athlete,
no, it doesn't have to be for a long period of time. A very short period of time. Because once a trans woman athlete, okay, if we're talking about a trans woman athlete, there's two things they have to do if there's a testosterone policy. Number one will be you have to be on an estrogen treatment. And the estrogen, as we know, increases fat mass in our bodies and changes, the fat in we get breasts and bigger bottoms and bigger thighs and all that type of stuff. The other one is anti-androgens, which is, in another term, is chemical castration. The same medication that we give to male prostate cancer sufferers to chemically castrate them. The same medication that we give to some sex offenders in some correctional jurisdictions to chemically castrate them. This is the same treatment given to trans women that we have to take as a prerequisite to compete in sport. And what this does is very quickly change us. So our T levels drop very quickly, sometimes from around 30, which mine were, to about 0.2 nanomoles. My body started breaking down very badly about 14 nanomoles. I started becoming unwell, okay, because each person's T level is their normal T level only. So we're dropping our T levels from 30 down to under 1, right? Hemoglobin levels follow T levels. So within 3 to 4 months, we've gone from male level hemoglobin levels to female levels, a drop of about 15%. And this is indisputable. This happens without a doubt with every athlete that lowers their T, an XY athlete. So within 3 to 4 months, we've gone from male level to female level. So we've gone from being, say, some of us a V8 engine in a big car. We've now got the same big ute, but now we've got a little 4-cylinder engine with no hemoglobin. So it's not getting any oxygen to all those muscles. It's not getting oxygen to the lungs, not getting oxygen to your heart, to your limbs. So what happens is an opposite to blood doping. So we get fatigued very quickly, and it takes us longer as a trans athlete, woman athlete, to recover. So for someone like me that's got no androgen receptors, I lost my gonads 17 years ago. If I ride a bike, say, and push down on the pedal, my body will go, Kirsti, you need more testosterone. It'll send a message to my brain. My brain will go, main androgen receptors, give me some more testosterone for Kirsti. They will look around my body and go, hang on, they're not there. They're in Thailand 17 years ago. So Kirsti doesn't get that. So it's going to take what will take an XX female with healthy ovaries, right, which are more sensitive to T than a male's gonads are anyway. They get immediate recovery from that pedal stroke. I take a week to recover from that one pedal stroke until I can recover naturally. So it's massively changes everything in your body as an athlete.
Does this suggest that, trans women who are still competing as athletes, they maybe shouldn't reduce their testosterone quite down to that 0.2 level? They should maybe maintain it a little higher?
The point with that is there's such a varied range in T levels between in males and obviously in trans women. So let's look at male athletes, right? Elite male athletes. We've got about 25% of elite male athletes that have T levels below 8 nanomoles naturally. And we have quite a number of elite male athletes that have T levels below 2 and 3 nanomoles that are elite athletes. And that is their normal healthy T level. So this blanket T levels has always been wrong. It's always should have been on an individual TUE basis. So Kirsti started at 30, went down to 0.2 because I don't have any androgen receptors. I've had to have testosterone put back in my body for the last 2 years now, and I'm trying to get my levels back up to about 14.
So that's just to maintain your kind of basic health.
To maintain my basic, because what happens, the Warpath guidelines have been mischaracterized for sport. They were never designed for the athlete, for long-term androgen needs. They were designed to feminize us, not designed for long-term. So a librarian trans woman that doesn't play sport is not going to notice this stuff. But someone that's a trans athlete, that's been a trans athlete and a world champion, that notices the slightest thing in my body that changes, this is massive. This is absolutely massive. And this has been the problem by studying non-trans athletes, right? They haven't looked at the actual athletes that have lived and breathed this stuff, that can talk about it and explain it.
Another thing that comes up a lot is like different sports need different kinds of skills. So when people talk about trans athletes, they kind of talk about a blanket ban, and they don't consider, like, there's the case of, do you know Emily Bridges, the cyclist? The case of Emily Bridges. Now, she was doing everything right. She was monitoring her T level. She was having regular checks, and then they changed the rules just before she was going to compete.
Yeah, the day before.
And so I was thinking there are certain sports, aren't there, that are going to be more affected. Like, say, endurance is a factor rather than brute strength sometimes. So in cycling, I think that's one of those sports where, you know, your body is T levels do matter probably more than if you sort of playing. I don't know. I can't compare two sports because I don't know enough about sports. But I would just,
like, shooting probably doesn't need much.
In
terms of testosterone, unless you're running between shots. But
even within sports, there's differences, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at athletics. We know for a fact that we lose endurance levels very, very quickly. Like I said, we lose our hemoglobin levels reduced to female norms in one full blood cycle, 3 to 4 months. So someone transitioning to be a marathon runner or anything over about 400 meters, maximum 12 months, probably 6 months is all that you need for that transition. To top on the muscle mass, then we've got also the hemoglobin loss, the muscle mass loss on top of that, the increase in recovery time, and all those type of things play into it, right? So, but in the 100-meter running, it may be a bit more strength for that sport, right, for the 100 over the endurance levels for the marathon and 800. So it may take 2 years to minimise the strength. So even within a sport, there could be different levels, you know what I mean, and different requirements. In some sports, there should be no T-level requirements because T-levels, there's a lot of myths about T-levels, right? What we know about testosterone is that XX and XY need two very different lots of testosterone levels to maintain daily health. XX need about 6 to 10 times less testosterone than an XY person, okay? And that's the number one thing. Daily health relates to 200 things with testosterone for an XY person, not say for XX. So, you know, we reduce on XY, we reduce on XX, two completely different things. So a lot of people are talking apples and oranges in this testosterone stuff. And secondly, with testosterone, there is no science that shows that a male or a female athlete with increased natural hormone levels has an advantage over athletes, male or female, with the lower level. It's got nothing to do. What we know is if you add synthetic testosterone to a person and raise their normal levels, okay, you're going to get an athletic advantage, particularly if you give it to an X person, because XX athletes are more sensitive to testosterone than XY. And conversely, what we know is if you take testosterone away from an XY person, they become unwell. The same as what happens when they take it away from Caster Semenya. She ends up with bad bones, muscle atrophy, bad lungs. The same as a male that goes through prostate cancer. The same as a male athlete that needs a therapeutic use exemption for T. And the same for Kirsti, the same for Hannah Mounsey, the same for Ivy and Laurel Hubbard. T deprivation does not discriminate. It does not discriminate. And anyone that says it does are a deer in the headlight, and they do not know what they're talking about. androgen deprivation is premature aging. It eventually kills you. So it not only minimises every advantage, it actually can kill you. And it put me in the intensive care unit with really bad lungs full of fluid from this treatment. And that was because my sporting body denied my health needs. I needed testosterone put back in my body, and they denied my health needs. And I've had to remove myself from sport to be able to get my health needs met. And that's already been proven a human rights breach by another transgender athlete, Kristen Worley, in Canada in 2017, when she showed the policies of the UCI and the OIC had damaged her health at 10 nanomoles. So the science exists, and it has done for a long time in this stuff. When they say the science doesn't exist, it doesn't exist on transgender athletes, and it doesn't exist on female athletes or male athletes.
Right.
You know, but the science of androgen deprivation definitely exists.
Right. So how did you fight that battle then to get what you needed?
How did I find? Well, like I said, I was an athlete, and I found my body breaking down, and I was very lucky to come across Kristen Worley about 10 years ago, because I didn't know what was happening to my body. Because when I transitioned, all I was told was you got to reduce your testosterone levels and get them back down to zero and feminize. And then I try and play sport, and I'm wondering why I'm starting to break my bones. I'm wondering why, no matter what, I've got complete muscle atrophy. I wonder why my lungs are filling up. Yeah. And I go and see an endocrinologist, and they say, you need testosterone put back on your body. I then link up with Kristen Worley, who teaches me about this. And Kristen Worley, she was the very first trans athlete to be sex verified under the original 2003 Stockholm Consensus Guidelines, the first trans policy. Christine is surgically transitioned like myself. And when she tried to re-enter sport, her body broke down. So she applied for a therapeutic use exemption. And instead of taking a couple of weeks like it does for a male athlete, it took a couple of years for her to be granted. And in that time, she ended up getting osteoporosis. She ended up getting complete muscle atrophy, and it took her right out of sport. So Kristen chose to give up her career, and with the backing of her government, took on the major sporting bodies, and she was able to get this heard outside of the sports courts, which was very unique. This was heard in a human rights court, right? And the UCI have still got an agreement on that. The UCI are very aware that at 2.5 nanomoles, this is going to damage people and kill trans people eventually in sport. So this hasn't finished. You know, this is going to end up in the courts without a doubt. Policies like the UCI, they're very aware their policies are damaging people, and they will be liable for this.
Yeah,
and
so
other
what about like your average
blindly will be liable for it.
What about your average trans woman
is
who's
to
not a
save
sports
trans
person?
women's health? Yeah, I want to say, because I'm very worried that the current policies are going to make young trans girls become very unwell in sport and beyond, because they're not addressing our health needs long term.
Yeah. This
is why the OIC abandoned the blanket T levels, because over 30 of us XY women have been damaged already from this, and sports bodies are still continuing to ignore this science blindly, leaving themselves wide open to litigation in human rights courts.
Yeah, so is that a recent change to the IOC then? Is that the change that happened in the past couple of weeks?
Well, the OIC introduced a new gender framework in 2021, which the OIC has never. They've always just created guidelines in 2003 and 2015, and they created those guidelines as a starting point for other sports to follow to create their own guidelines. So, and what they've done again in 2021 is created a set of guidelines, but a bigger set of guidelines this time. Instead of being a one paragraph thing just about testosterone, this is a 10-point framework, which addresses safety, which addresses perceived advantage, which addresses the science. It's got 10 key areas that sports, if they want to adopt a trans policy, it helps guide them to make policy. So, and the biggest thing about the OIC policy is that advantage can't be presumed. So you can't just presume that trans women have a blanket advantage. You must have the science and research to show that it exists, you know. And the other big thing is that we must be treated as individuals. And like when we look at, say, some sports like rugby union cite safety as a reason that we were allowed to discriminate against trans women, right? That makes no sense, because it's not whether you're trans or cisgender that's the danger in sport. It's the disparity in strength, speed, endurance, and or physique, depending on the sport that's relevant, not the source of disparity. So in the OIC realise this, and sports like the AFL in Australia realised this a number of years ago before the OIC, that it's not that's not your trans status, it's your size, your speed, your endurance levels, and your physique. And how a sport like the AFLW manage this, what they do, that they test all their elite female players. They go back 2 years and they put them through a number of physio tests. They do like check their weight, height, their run times, their sprint times, their burpee times, their match GPS raw data. They collate this, and then when a trans woman comes along, a trans woman's got to apply. They've got a testosterone limit, which I don't agree with, a blanket limit, but also the same physical tests that the cisgender women are tested on, which gives the AFL the benchmarks of what's sort of the strength capabilities and speed capabilities of the women that are actually playing the game. Then they can test the individual trans athlete on the exact same test, and they can see if the trans athlete's got an advantage in strength, speed, endurance, and or physique. They're the things that are important. So this and the AFL policy and the OIC have recommended other sports to follow the AFL lead, which I've suggested that for years now. So it's great to see the OIC have been listening.
One thing that always comes up,
research sports need to do. That is the research, not how long it takes someone to lose 10%, because there's so many variables in that.
Yeah, so I was going to say, like, one thing that comes up in the arguments, like on Twitter, is that trans women are cheating. They're doing it because they want to win. But it's like the last thing you would do if you wanted to win things is start reducing your testosterone. You know what I mean? And complying, with.
Well, if we want to have the fictional scenario of a man pretending to be a trans woman, like they're talking about in the UK, and wants to compete now in the let's say in the 100 meters running, okay. Well, now that man's got to somehow get on hormone treatment. It's going to take him up in England up to 4 years to even get on the treatment, and then he's got to reduce his hormone levels to under 2.5 nanomoles for at least 2 years prior to him running in 100 meters.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Athletics. But then he's got to go through and apply, and World Athletics can extend that period on a case-by-case basis if there's still a disparity. And like Sharron Davies on this recent interview was saying things like that, if we didn't have male and female categories, no woman would win. Well, we've had trans categories now for 10 Olympic game campaigns, right? There's been 6,500 Olympic medals been awarded since trans women have been able to compete at the Olympics. About half of those are born to women. So about 3,250 Olympic medals. You know how many have gone to transgender women? Zero.
None.
Not one of those 3,500 medals have gone to transgender women. So we don't have to, no one's suggesting abandon the women's category. Trans women athletes are saying, let's have policies that are backed by research, backed by the sciences, that mitigate the male puberty for people like me that experience the male puberty, that were elite male athletes. No one's saying let Warren turn into Kirsti in the Olympics today and compete as Kirsti tomorrow. Especially trans athletes are not saying that. I've never heard a trans athlete even remotely say that, because all us trans athletes, we weren't born in lettuce patches, or cabbage patches. All of us have got. Some of us have got children. Some of us have got daughters. Some of us have got sisters, and we're all got girlfriends. So the integrity of women's sport is very important to us because we are women, right? Yeah. Someone like myself, I've got 3 daughters and 6 granddaughters who are all little athletes. Wow. So maintaining the integrity of women's sport is more important to me, because I've got a lot more children than Sharron Davies and grandchildren.
Well, it's like it would make a mockery of sport anyway. If there was, if it was seen that trans women were just winning, what would be the point in playing the sport? Because it's like that. It just shows you how much of a myth it is that there's this kind of, well, the way that they frame it is like trans women are taking over. It's like an invasion narrative, but it doesn't.
Well, in the UK, right?
There's no evidence for that.
Well, there's 35 registered trans rugby players in the whole of the United Kingdom. 35. Right. You know how many are trans women out of that 35?
None. But one?
4.
All right.
31 are trans men playing in men's league.
Mm.
So trans women are actually opening up opportunities in the women's category. There's more trans men going over stealing men's spots than what there are us trans women.
Nobody talks about that side of things, do they? It's like,
there's
trans
only
men, that in sports is totally ignored.
And the only study that's ever been done on trans athletes, right, that has shown an absolute clear advantage has been the Roberts 2020 Air Force study. And Dr. Roberts, he said himself, the athletes that dominated this study were the trans men, not the trans women.
Mm.
Were the trans men. These trans men saw a 43% improvement in 12 months. They were outperforming trans men in 1.5 kilometre runs after a year, and outperforming them in strength activities. And so what's the actual scientific truth in all this is 180 degrees from what people like Sharron Davies are advocating. It's a 180 degrees, the scientific truth. In actual fact, I see the athletes that are going to star in the trans category in the future are going to be sports where endurance sports where trans men are going to excel, and sports where it's limited by weight as well, because these trans men are getting about a 20% muscle mass increase in the first 12 months, and they're getting their hemoglobin levels are going from XX to XY range.
Yeah.
These guys, and I can't wait till we see the first trans man win the 3,000 steeplechase and wins 800 metres men's. And I guarantee, come back in 2032 and everyone will say Kirsti Miller 30 was right, and I will be right.
Yeah.
And if the policies remain the same with trans women, with this blanket T levels, we're going to see less and less trans women and trans girls. By 2034, you won't see trans women in sport. Most of us will have osteoporosis and be very unhealthy. So it's 180 degrees, the scientific truth in all this.
Can I ask you about a specific case? Because when I get into arguments about this with people on Twitter, they always bring up one name, and that name is Fallon Fox. Now, I looked into, because this was, the Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
This is how the trans debate came into the public, really, in America, because Joe Rogan was talking about, because Joe Rogan's an MMA person, isn't he? And he was saying that Fallon Fox is dangerous, and I didn't know, because obviously if you look at the pictures and you look at what is presented on Twitter, it looks like, gosh, yeah, Fallon Fox should not have been fighting with these women. But what is your perception of that? Is that realistic or?
Absolutely not. Fallon Fox, for starters, they still go on about it. So this just shows you that, like, how desperate they are. Fallon retired, hasn't fought since 2014. They're still going on about it.
Right.
So she's like 9 years, right? And her last fight, she got knocked out by TKO by a cisgender woman. Knocked out, lost her last fight. She had a record of 4-1, never won a title. She only fought lower girls. She broke a single orbital bone. An orbital bone is the most common practice injury in any contact sport, particularly MMA, right? It happens every training session pretty much. There's a million examples of that. And when Fallon first competed in the female category, Fallon was about 7 years post-operative. Fallon would have been actually at a massive disadvantage to her female competitors because her hemoglobin levels, like I said, would have reduced 7 years before the fight, her first fight in the women's category. Her recovery rate, so for every punch Fallon threw, it's going to take her a week to recover compared to her opponent on the other side of the ring. So Fallon absolutely had no advantage. She never outperformed anyone. If anything, she totally underperformed. She got knocked out by TKO in the last fight, you know. So
right, and she hasn't,
and they're still raving about it 9 years later.
Yeah,
it shows you, you know, what have they got? You know, they whinge about a handful of trans people. There's millions of us all around the world, like, and we've been playing sport for many, many years all around the world. We've got a history of trans sport participation at international level since 1976, and in Australia, many national sports since the 70s, right? And in England as well, right? They've been allowed to play at Wimbledon. We've been allowed to have trans women at Wimbledon since 1976. I asked any turf or any of these UK media to tell me who's the top-ranked UK trans tennis player, who's the top-ranked UK trans woman over 100 metres in the pool and on the track. And until you can start talking about people dominating, not fictional athletes, sit down, shut up and start learning and educating yourself, you know?
Yeah.
There's so many irrational fears in this.
Well, like, one thing that worries me is it might filter down to a more amateur level, because once you have this fear in the public, and it's like people can be, you know, opinions can be easily swayed by these kind of, you know, bogus kind of...
Well, you know, a common experience with trans women and trans girls is we gain our greatest acceptance on the field, right? And the people that are the most educated in this space are the people in sports. And in actual fact, it's been the grassroots sports that have been actually driving this, not the top level of sports, the grassroots sports. And it's been people in communities all around the world who've got, like me here, for example, in Broken Hill. I didn't know I could play women's AFL 10 years ago. I was walking down the street and these 3 young girls go, "Auntie Kirsti, why don't you come and play football with us?" I go, "I don't know if I'm allowed." Right. And this is how trans women and they get to play sport all around the world. We don't get there banging on the doors. Like, I never got on the door of the local Broken Hill AFL and saying, "Let me in, let me play." I had them begging me because trans people are part of communities. And our girlfriends want us to play and our sisters want us to play. So we've been playing this sport for years and we gain our greatest acceptance on the field. Like, the women that I played against in the first games are my biggest supporters. Like, the captain of the first team I ever played against in women's soccer back in 2013, and she's a former Australian representative, the best athlete Broken Hill's ever produced. She was the captain of the opposition team in the first game I played as a woman. Wow. She not only didn't have a problem with me, she ended up marrying me. Wow. You know, fell in love with me. So
that's
the
great.
stuff that trans women aren't accepted. Like, you ask the girls that are actually playing the game, most trans women on the team are the most popular girls in the team. They love us. Yeah. And it's like, you know, in real life, where we work and that, we end up real popular girls. Once people get to be humanised, they realise we're the same.
I think people can relate to that idea of facing up to something in your life, and, you know, you've come to terms with who you are, you've got a fresh perspective and you're more empathetic, you know, you've got a much more holistic view of the world. I think that's true. Yeah,
and I think because too, like, say a sport like women's rugby, right, or women's AFL, the girls that play the game understand that, like, in our team alone, we've got girls in our team from like barely hitting 40 kilograms, right, and maybe barely not even reaching 5 foot, and we've got other girls in the team that are 6'4" and another girl in the team that's like 140 kilograms. So, you know, we've got nearly 100 kilograms difference between the biggest and the smallest girl in the team. And we've got nearly 1.5 foot difference between the tallest and the smallest. So, like, people that have played the game don't see a trans woman. They look at me. Like, I go on the field, I'm 61 kilograms, 5'7". I'm a size 8. You know, like, I go on a football field, I've got the skinniest legs on the field. Like, if you come to Broken Hill and said, "We've got to ban Kirsti Miller for having an unfair advantage," they would laugh at you. Yeah. The girls would slap you in the face here and say, "How dare you? We smashed that Kirsti Miller. We broke her arm in 3 places in the first year playing women's soccer in Broken Hill, and we smashed her ribs." So they
sounds like a dangerous sport.
Yeah, they talk about Fallon Fox having broken one orbital bone. Honest, my first year of women's soccer, my bone was smashed in 3 places from being tackled from a cisgender girl bigger than me. So,
yeah.
transgender bones are no bigger, stronger than, in actual fact, the biggest research on our bone health, 711 sample size, found that trans women prior to HRT have lower bone mineral density than cisgender men and women. And the reason for that is bone health relates to your participation in sport and PE and exercise, your diet, all those things. Well, trans women in society, we face discrimination, we face homelessness. Most of us want to be skinny as rakes and have bad diets to fit into size 8 dresses, you know. So as a community, trans women have got really bad bones.
Yeah.
You know? So we can't look at cisgender men and transgender women and say they are the same. We're two very complete different physiometric capabilities, particularly in sport, particularly trans women that have reduced their T. We are far, far closer to cisgender women than what we anywhere near cisgender men. So it makes sense that we play in the female category.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we were going to do this podcast today was so that Kirsti could kind of shine a light on some of the stuff that Sharron Davies, was saying in an interview that she did on GB News. So Frida, you were on the same show, weren't you, as a guest? But you didn't face Sharron. You came on later on with Kelly Maloney, the boxing trainer person. Yeah. So do you just want to explain what it was about, and then we'll get into reviewing what Sharron Davies said.
Well, they contacted me from GB News and asked me would I speak, because they know I'm a trans. I do the podcast and I put myself forward to speak on trans issues. Now, at first when they said it's going to be about sports, I was like, oh gosh, I better get on Kirsti Miller's Twitter and have a good look. Because this is where the best information is. But my point of view with the interview, because I thought I was going to be put against Sharron Davies at first, and that's what they told me was going to happen, but that didn't happen. So I just kind of, my point of view is I was only interested in why they're talking about this now. I didn't really have any facts and figures about, like Kirsti does, about sports, but my main topic to bring to the table was, so what is the real story here? Why are you talking about trans women in sport? Because the only reason you're suddenly interested in fairness and parity in sport is when you can make trans women a problem, and that was the fact of the matter. Now, I can't remember what was the first, because the way Neil Fox, the presenter, was pitching it was like he definitely agreed with Sharron, didn't he, at first?
He was very much on Sharon's side, I think.
Yeah. And then when he'd listened to me, I think he sort of, understood where I was coming from. But
so we put out a reaction video. I think it was episode 16, and we kind of, myself and Frida went through the whole thing. So today we want to go through just the first part, which was what Sharron Davies was saying. I mean, if we've got time, we can do the other half as well. But let's just see how it goes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play the intro, and then I'll stop it, and we can have a chat about what was said. So, are you okay? Are you going to stop it as we go? Or I'll just play the whole thing. I think I'll play a bit, stop it, play a bit, stop it, and then
all right.
I'll just kind of stop it when I think is a good point to stop.
Okay.
We'll just
okay.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. So here we go.
As sport continues to struggle with the transgender row, the British Triathlon Federation's new policy for an open category came into force today. The sport's going to be divided into two categories for athletes over the age of 12. There'll be a female category for those who are assigned the female sex at birth, and an open category, or in simple terms, all individuals, including male, transgender, and those non-binary who are male sex at birth. British Triathlon said the new approach follows on from a survey of over 3,000 members that found 80% are in support of the changes. Meanwhile, in last week, the World Boxing Council have announced they will introduce a transgender category for fighters, separate to the men's and women's categories. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by former Olympic swimmer and television presenter Sharron Davies.
Right, just before we start hearing from Sharron, I just wanted to ask you, Kirsti, what do you think about this kind of introducing the trans category into these sports? to me, it seems like it's a really weird thing to do because they're trying to preserve the female category and yet open up the male category into this open category, which would include, men, trans women, and anybody else, including non-binary people. So what do you think about
that? On a number of reasons, totally against it. Number one, it's not needed. It's not needed. There's been no science or research come out to say that trans women have a unfair advantage in swimming, running, or cycling. Like zero research at all that's come out since any policies. There's no reason for this. They haven't got the research. Triathlon. There is no reason for performance. There's no trans woman triathlete even competing in the elite level of the sport. So it's definitely not for a need basis. It's not from the science coming in. And it's not practical in triathlon or any sport. Like, the closest trans woman athlete to me is about 1,000 kilometres away. How am I going to compete,
Yeah.
So, and lastly, being outed as a trans person in certain parts of the world could get you killed.
That's true.
So they want to pretty much, triathlon want to put a T stamp on our forehead and out as trans, because it shouldn't be a prerequisite that you're out as trans just to play sport. You know what I mean? I believe that sport should have another category that competes alongside the male and female category, a unisex category, one that's voluntary that people can adopt to participate in. And I think in the future we're going to see more and more unisex sports, and not because people are going to, like, communities. We see it already in mixed netball, in mixed touch football, in mixed tennis. So I think not have this open category which they're saying here, which is just really exclusion for trans women, but have the male female category. They're definitely still needed, but have another category alongside. And I think that third category could end up the most popular category in sport in another 20 years' time.
Yeah, so a third category which is open to everybody is no kind of... Yeah. You see,
but a voluntary one, not putting people in boxes and saying you have to go over there.
What I worry about with this... The thing I worry about with this, when they talk about making a trans category, is that we just don't have the numbers. I mean, where are you going to get all these trans people from to play these sports? You
need 36 people to play a game of AFL. I'm the only AFL trans player here. Like, I'll get the best player, but come on. Yeah. So it's not needed on any level whatsoever. And anyone that suggests that, they're not at the start line. They're totally not. Like, the only people that would think this is a good idea would be terse. Right?
All right, let's carry on.
Welcome along. Happy New Year, Sharron. Is this the right move? It sounds a lot more inclusive and fair to me. Good?
Yes, good. I mean, Triathlon have been leading the way, really, in this country with setting that policy. They announced that they were going to do that the middle of last year. And it's a very fair policy. This is about protecting the female category, but creating an opportunity for everyone to be involved in sport. So that's why we have the open category. You mentioned transgender women, so that is people that are biologically male, but also enables people that are biologically female that are on testosterone who wouldn't be allowed to compete in the female category because that would break the rules to be able to compete as well. So this is enabling everyone to be able to compete, but it's also enabling females to still have fair sport, which is what I've always been fighting for.
Well, I'm sure, because, of course, there was the big story around last year, Leah Thomas, the University of Pennsylvania swimmer, who, of course, had transitioned from a man and was just an incredible swimmer and just won everything. And then the weightlifter as well. We had these two really stark cases that proved in a way how things needed to change, however tricky the situation was and however inclusive any governing body was trying to be. Clearly they needed to do some, I guess, lines in the sand and just say, look, we need to make some rules here. And this does seem, I hate to say, like common sense has prevailed.
So there we go. She's right from the start. She's agreeing with this kind of categorization and separation, different.
Yeah. And just that host there talking about Leah Thomas winning just everything. Yeah. Leah Thomas won one national title, the NCAA title. The first trans woman in any sport in 11 years to win a Division I title. and she won one event. Not many, she won one. And her winning time was 9.4 seconds slower than the record over that distance. There was around 27 records broken at the NCAA championships last year, 17 by one cisgender woman. Not one record was broken by Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas is not phenomenal. Leah Thomas is just an NCAA champion that's no more phenomenal than 1,000 other girls in front of her, you know what I mean? Like, she did nothing exceptional. Leah Thomas was a top 10 time as a first year in university. Leah Thomas has been on hormones for 2.5 years. When you hear people say she went from 550th to number one, that was after Leah had already been on hormones. Leah had to compete as Leah in the male category for a couple of years. So she progressively got slower in the male category before she switched over. So there's a lot of crap about Leah going around. That host there doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, this point about, you know, they're winning everything and blah, blah, blah. Well,
that's a lie. That's a total lie. They're not winning everything.
Yeah, and the other thing is, doesn't it kind of who you're competing against in that particular race?
Yeah,
is important, because you could be swimming against, you know, some people just from college. You know, it doesn't mean that they're any good.
There's one race the media got on with Leah. She won a 1,650-yard race, right, which is around 60-odd laps of that 25-yard pool, right?
Yeah. And
she won that race by 30 seconds, right? The same weekend, there was 2 high school girls in America that swam way, way faster.
Yeah.
It's just that her particular heat, she was 30 seconds faster than the girl over 1,650 yards, right? So, yeah, you've got to look at when you put her in the next stage, she was 10 seconds behind the record.
Yeah.
You know? So, and like Laurel Hubbard, they say Laurel Hubbard's another example. Laurel Hubbard is a perfect example to show that trans women don't have an advantage. Laurel Hubbard, a former national record holder, under-19 record holder in the male category. Laurel Hubbard competed in 2018 at the Commonwealth Games. Laurel Hubbard, by Sharron Davies and all the tourists, was going to dominate the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. Laurel broke her elbow attempting a lift due to androgen deprivation, I believe. Yeah. Same thing in Tokyo. Laurel was going to smash. Laurel didn't even do a successful lift, come dead last. In actual fact, like, they're 2 examples. If people want to cite Leah Thomas and Laurel Hubbard as the 2 examples why trans women should be not in the women's category, they're terrible examples. Yeah, they've shown who's someone who come last at the Olympics and someone who's 9 seconds behind the record. So
not a good start there.
Despite them 2, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right, let's get back into it.
Yeah, I mean, that is what we've been after all along, really, is basically using the science. So there's 17 peer-reviewed science reports in the world, the last just before Christmas, which shows that we cannot remove male puberty advantage. Now, in Olympic sport, that's anywhere from about 10% to weightlifting at 30%. In something like boxing, a male and a female of equal weight, so this isn't someone bigger or stronger, this is someone of equal weight and height and size, a male will hit 160% harder onto a female structure, which actually is more fragile. Our bone structure is more fragile. So it's incredibly dangerous in something like a contact sport and in boxing, rowing, rugby, any of those contact sports are going to be incredibly dangerous. So it's really important that we put safety first, then we put fairness, and then we make sure we come up with ways to be inclusive, because it really is important that everyone can do sport.
So these 17 reports she's talking about. Let's talk about that, because I have no idea what those are.
I know exactly what she's talking about. She's quoting some work from Hilton and Lundberg. She's quoting from Hilton and Lundberg. Emma Hilton wrote a paper back in 2020, the Hilton and Lundberg review, and they did a systematic review on some of the studies, but there's many flaws with this review that Emma Hilton did. Number one, she's got no history or qualifications in this space and never done this before. They looked at 13 different studies, none of them related to trans athletes. So the 17 studies that Sharron Davies are quoting do not exist. There's none on trans athletes, none of those 17 on trans athletes. One of the studies she's talking about is a study called Wick et al. That went for like 11 months. The trans women in that study were actually had lower lean body mass prior to HRT than even before it started the study. So Sharron just waffles off all these numbers, but they don't exist. These studies don't exist. And if they did exist, the Olympics would have banned us. All the other sports would have blanket banned us. They haven't. The OIC just had 2.5 years to go through the research. There is no studies, no research anywhere in the world for a single sport that supports a blanket ban of transgender women or girls in sport. Nothing exists.
So who is this Emma Hilton? I've seen this name come up. Emma Hilton.
Emma Hilton's tied up with Fair Play for Women, and she with that Sex Matters group. She's written a lot of anti-trans stuff. She's very well known to her. She's written what could be best described as a argumentative essay, biased essay, which has been presented as a literature review. It's extremely biased. They don't. They leave out a lot of the literature that doesn't support their views. I've done a lot of written work on debunking this stuff. There's a report come out from Canada that specifically debunks the Emma Hilton studies, and this is the one study that all the TERFs rely on. This Hilton and Lundberg study, and it's really not worth. It's not worth the paper it's written on, and that's why sporting bodies don't even utilise it anymore. It's totally flawed,
right?
And anyone cites it really is a deer in the headlight. Like a simple fact is, not one of the studies in the Hilton Lundberg had trans athletes in it.
Right.
Not one. There's no primary research Hilton and Lundberg done. No, Lundberg's done a little bit of biased primary research, but Hilton, none. No qualifications, but she just happened to be paid to write this thing, you know? So,
right.
Yeah.
So when it comes to research then, what is reliable research? What reliable research has been done that we could cite?
Research since going way back, since before the 2003 policy, things like Gurin et al. That showed that that hemoglobin levels reduced to the 15%. We lost some muscle mass. We gained fat mass. So there's been probably about 30 or 40 different studies on this subject, some better than others, but mainly there's not been many long-term cross-sectional studies. A lot of studies have had many flaws. But probably the best studies are coming out now. There's a recent study coming out, Alvarez, 2022, which has been misreported once again. It was a long-term study of trans women, and it actually found that our VO2 and our muscle mass was lower than cis men and cisgender women. And it actually found that there was functionality problems in our muscles, which was showing that trans women actually had less force and power. There's other studies come out from Brazil which shows that the whole strength advantage dissipates. There's other studies that's come out from Joanna Harper which have shown that our hemoglobin levels reduce to female range in 3 to 4 months. The Roberts 2020 Air Force study, another one that's been widely misreported. I remember Sean Ingle wrote a article on this in The Guardian saying trans women retain 12% advantage, this Roberts 2020 Air Force study. But when you look at this study, that's not actually what happened. This study looked at trans men and trans women in the Air Force and compared the trans women against cis women, the trans men against the cis men. Prior to the study, this Air Force study, the trans women were like around 30%. They did about 30% more sit-ups, 15% more push-ups in a minute, and ran this 1.5 kilometre run 21% faster than this group of cisgender women. Mind you, the gender gap at 1.5 miles is only 10%. But this group of trans women were 21% faster because they were about 7 inches taller, right?
Right.
But after 2 years, that whole running has now gone, because another follow-up study, which is a lot bigger sample size, has confirmed after 2 years the running has been lost. So the 30%, the 21% increase in the running was completely dissipated. We lost 31% in sit-ups and 15% in push-ups, right? So that's a loss of strength, speed, and endurance. Conversely, the transgender men, Dr. Roberts said that the trans men, the XX trans men on testosterone, were the athletes that actually dominated this study. So Sean Ingle didn't report that. He didn't report that actual trans women ended up losing all performance capabilities. He didn't report that, right? He just reported that one particular group after 12 months had 12% advantage, the group that were, 7 inches taller. He didn't report that trans men saw a 43% improvement in only 12 months, and trans men were outperforming cisgender men over 1.5 mile run and in the amount of sit-ups in a minute. So there's a lot of misreporting in that. So the science exists on this stuff. It doesn't exist so much as in, per se, trans athletes, but the science of androgen deprivation and endocrine health of trans people clearly exists and has done for a long time. And it's recognised with the World Anti-Doping Authority, where they recognise androgen deprivation to be a very serious ailment for XY athletes, because the World Anti-Doping Authority allows XY male elite athletes to be granted a therapeutic use exemption to be given synthetic testosterone and still compete in sport. So the science exists. There's things that Sharron Davies is saying about 17 peer-reviewed studies that clearly show it's not mitigated. Not one of those exists.
Yeah, it was like
she was making it up.
It was like she was trying to she was kind of grasping at straws, quoting these reports and then no details of what they were. It was kind of what are you talking about?
None. Yeah. None whatsoever. Yeah, she's totally she's not with the science on this at all. She's done is
she's with the lobby group.
Yeah, it's like
she's kept this little echo chamber of the people that she only relates to and hasn't opened up. Whereas I speak to both sides in this. You've got to speak to, and she's taking her science from one side. So, and everything she knows is right and everything the OIC knows wrong. I back the OIC compared to Sharron Davies' knowledge on this. I definitely back the OIC over Sharron Davies on this. Like, we got to think Sharron Davies, not so long ago, put out a tweet thinking that if you put a man and a woman on an island, that humanity won't die out. But you've got to think that some gay people exist, and she did suggest she bagged drag queens, that other infamous tweet she done. So, like Sharron Davies is just plucking these things out of straws. She's really, she's not even at the start line. She's embarrassingly bad at this. Like, I honestly don't think she did biology at all at school. It shows in what she's saying. She's a real novice in what she's quoting here, an absolute novice.
I think because of the way it works politically is when somebody like Sharron Davies will speak up, she'll get amplified by certain media people because they want this point of view. They want to keep this narrative going. So she becomes useful to them, but she's got the script, but the script is wrong. That's the problem.
Oh, the script's wrong, and the script only works when she can talk to deers in the headlights. Like, the script doesn't work. If she tried to walk into the Australian Sports Commission and waffle off this stuff, or tried to walk into the OIC with this type of stuff, like, we would laugh at her because this is like her talking like she's not even at the start line. She's so, like, her understanding of testosterone and how it works in the body, and that she's such a dunce, and the only people she's fooling are fools.
Yeah.
Right, let's get back to the video.
There's some more of it.
There's some more.
It is, and this for anyone that obviously is transitioning, it's obviously a hugely emotional time for them. Obviously, by the time they get to be competing like this, they will have transitioned and will have had to have done so for, I think, 3 years is what the IOC is saying. But of course, it has to be fair, because people, I was going to say people like yourselves have trained all your life to do a certain sport, and then maybe if the rules had stood and not changed, there would have been no chance maybe. Second may have been the best you could have done.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You say 3 years. I mean, actually, in lots of sports, it's way less than that. And the NC2As, when you mentioned Leah Thomas, it was a year. And that was to reduce your testosterone levels from male levels of testosterone to 10 nanomoles of testosterone per litre. I have less than 1. Most females have less than 1. So, that was 10 times the average female, and they were still allowed to compete, and they only had to do that for a year. The last study that came out pre-Christmas showed that it doesn't really matter. If you carry on training, if you suppress your testosterone, a male will lose very little strength. So it's just an unfair situation, and women have worked so hard to get, some form of equality in sport. We still don't have that. We're still a very long way away from what males have in sport, but we are gradually getting there. And this was definitely going to put us back. So this isn't about, anyone being transphobic or anyone not believing that sport is for everybody. This was about saying that biological females, which is half of the world, deserve the right to equal opportunities of success in sport. And let's find better solutions, let's find better ways. And female and open seems to be the best. But the World Boxing Council also announced just on Thursday that they're going to introduce a transgender league. Now, I'm all for that as well. If that's a way forward that transgender athletes would like it to be, then let's support that too. And let's make the federations work with transgender groups of people and athletes to find things that will work for them.
Now,
so, it sounds straight away that Sharron's, spouting the gender critical kind of arguments here.
Yeah. She's not only doing that, she's also, once again, she's showing that she's not even at the start line in their understanding of testosterone. Sharron there says that some policies allow for up to 10 nanomole, some 12 months, and she's only 1 nanomole, and blah, 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 blah. Well, like I said before, that XX and XY have 2 very different normal testosterone levels in their bodies, right? An XY person needs 6 to 10 times the amount of T to maintain daily health than an XX person, because testosterone is our primary sole androgen in an XY body. Not so for XX. It's human growth hormone, and they get a double hit as their estrogen turns into testosterone, right? So, and as Sharron says that most women are under 1 nanomole, a recent study showed that 90% of women in the community have testosterone levels of under 2 nanomoles, and a study of 250 trans women found 95% of them have T levels under 2 nanomoles, right? So, and also this T levels, there was a study in 2014, the endocrine profiles of 693 elite athletes post-competition setting, and they found a 16.7% overlap of T levels between elite male and elite female athletes, and around 13% of elite female athletes have testosterone levels in the male range, and around 25% of elite male athletes have testosterone in the normal female range, and around 10% have levels below 3 nanomoles, elite male athletes. So once again, in this interview, Sharron Davies is showing she's totally not at the start line in her understanding of testosterone. She's promoting bogus science once again in the testosterone. She really is. The only fools that she is fooling are the fools in this. Like she would be laughed at any sports meeting on this stuff. She's totally bad science, what she's saying here.
Yeah, she seems to be making a lot of generalizations and using bad science,
and
ignoring the point that you were making before.
These policies that she quotes, the 10 nanomole, that was the policy for the 2016 Olympic Games, the policy for the 2018 Commonwealth Games, the policy for the Winter Olympic Games in 2018 winners, and so 2 Olympic summer and 2 Winter Olympic Games and 2 Commonwealth Games had 10 nanomole levels for trans women in 12 months. We never had a medalist in any of those trans women.
No.
So the policy did work. There hasn't been any dominating trans women, and as Sharron tried to portray there. She's not only got bogus science with a T, she's got bogus, she's bogus with the results. She's lying. She's really lying.
They was trying to say that, women have fought to get where they are, and now it's all going up in the air because there are trans women competing. And then she keeps repeating the phrase biological female to make that distinct. She's obviously making that distinction because, she knows how that works. When most people watching that won't be thinking about science. They'll just see Sharron Davies, Olympic swimmer. She obviously knows what she's talking about. Clearly she doesn't.
Clearly she doesn't. And she's only fooling the fools. She is not at the start line in this. Her understanding of biology and endocrine health of how it works in sport she's really a deer in the headlights. She truly is. It's quite embarrassing for her.
Let's carry on. We're almost at the end of the part one, so let's keep going.
You came in for an awful lot of stick, didn't you, before for your views? Why do you think that is? And do you think actually that has it calmed down? I hope it has for you. And do you think this will help calm things down in general?
Yeah, it has. I think FINA, the World Aquatic Federation, making their stance and deciding that they were going to protect female sport helped a great deal. That was off the back of what they could see happening with Leah. What I didn't want to happen was that for us to have a Leah in every single sport before people did what they already know. We have two categories at the Olympic Games, males and females, for a reason. If we didn't have that, women wouldn't win events. It would be all won by men. So that is why we have it in the first place. And to say that there's no difference and testosterone makes no difference is actually ridiculous, So let's be honest, let's work with the science and let's come up with really good solutions. Things have definitely got better. I still get massive pile-ups every once in a while, but, I've only ever wanted to work with the science, and I've only ever wanted there to be fair sport for everybody. And I think when there is fair sport for men, there should be fair sport for women. Let me give you a ridiculous example of what's going on at the moment in USA Rowing, for example. So USA Rowing have turned around and said in the women's category, anyone can identify as a woman and compete. But when it comes to the mixed relays, in other words, when there's supposed to be 2 women and 2 men, only biological females can take part because it will affect men. Now, you tell me how that is fair.
Yeah, so
I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that last bit. Don't really want to comment on that last part because I think that was just a ridiculous example. But she's.
I love how she says she likes concentrating on the science and the facts.
Yeah, I wish she would.
She's clearly not concentrating on the science and the facts. If she wants to have a Leah Thomas in every sport, well, Leah Thomas once again was 9.4 seconds slower than the NCAA record. So if that's Sharron Davies' example of a dominating trans athlete, 9.5 seconds slower than the record, that's not really following the science. And when she's there talking about, once again, about if we didn't have the female or male category and all that stuff, we've had trans policies, once again, for 10 Olympic campaigns already.
Yeah.
And we've never had a female trans woman win a single medal, So she's trying to say that it's men against women each time she talks about this, but she never says it's trans women meeting policy that mitigates the male puberty. She just throws in all this other crap and this language about protecting women. Protecting women from what? Like I said, there's been 3,250 Olympic medals awarded since trans women have been able to compete, right? Not one of them's gone to trans women at the Olympic Games. There's not one national title in the UK in a single women's sport since 1976 that's gone to a trans woman, won by a trans woman athlete. So when she's talking about fairness and that, I believe in fairness too, but I believe in fairness for all women, and that includes transgender women as well.
The irony of all this is it's like, because trans women are competing, it's bringing focus onto women's sports. We're actually we're looking at female swimming events that most people would probably never see on, to even know about. So it's showing girls that, these sporting categories exist. And it's like Sharron Davies' new job. she seems to be making a bit of money on the side, being this spokesperson for sports science, but she's not really, and seems to be her job now. You know, she's being funded by this lobby groups, and I don't know what she'd be doing if she wasn't doing this. You know, nobody would probably be paying any attention whatsoever.
And you know, it's like, you know, when they've been indoctrinated by this gender critical mob because they've got a common language. Yeah. And you see, it's like they all must be sent a cheat sheet every Monday and will say, right, like the day that the gender critical started calling us trans-identified males instead of trans women was the day that Sharron Davies started using it. Yeah. So that's all a common language, and they use these.
Oh yeah, it's all dog whistle. Yeah.
It's all a dog whistle.
I think they have a weekly meeting, these gender crits, and they all decide what they're going to talk about that week.
WhatsApp group.
Yeah, and when she says biological women, and the general public think, oh, biological women are all XX, right?
Yeah.
There's 9 chromosome types in this world. There's XX men, XX women. This is without even considering transgender people in society.
Yeah.
So when she says biological women, Sharron Davies could have been competing against women back in Moscow with XY chromosomes, XXY.
Mm.
No one knows. Who do we know? We don't even know if Sharron Davies what her chromosomes are. You know what I mean? So, and it's not chromosomes. It's not what controls your health in relation to athletic performance is the amount of hormones in your body today. Not yesterday, not last week, not next week. What's in your body today? And this is where Sharron Davies is totally ignoring the science, using these buzzwords, trying to just get those media grabs and stuff, but she's really not the expert to go to if you really want the truth in this stuff.
No, we very rarely hear from anybody that actually knows the actual facts or anything, because like these kind of news shows, they're not really interested in that. They're just interested in this culture war kind of, you know, back and forth, which, you know, I do go in for, but when I was on there, my main focus wasn't, because obviously I don't know the facts that you know, but I'm interested in why they're talking about it now. And because there's been trans women in sport for many years, and it's only in recent years that it seemed to have become this big media.
The reason I believe that, because the marriage equality debates were won pretty much around the world, and then the next easy target was the trans community, and the easiest target within the trans community was the trans athletes, right? And we have been used as a rallying call to arms to these conservative voters to try and stop progressive changes to society.
Yeah.
That is it in a nutshell. That is the reason we're having this debate today. Not because trans women dominating. This is totally a political debate. And like when in the first 2 weeks of the last federal election in Australia, the main story was transgender athletes, right? And you know what? There wasn't one single sport in Australia calling out this stuff. It was totally politicians and a number of well-paid blonde turfs, people like Sharron Davies speaking in Australia, people like Nancy Hogarth-McGrath. These people are paid by that Sex Matters and the
they're a big network.
Alliance. Yeah. It's all related to religion. Okay, so it's a political debate. This isn't a sports debate, it's political, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
They've confected this outrage, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the first part. So the next bit is where Frida and Kelly Maloney come in. So do you want to go through that as well? Because there are some points I think we should talk about. Yeah, all right, so let's continue.
Absolutely.
Let's keep going.
Well, we're going to continue this discussion in just a moment, but for the moment, Sharron, thanks for joining us. And I wish you a happy new year. Really appreciate that. Let's bring in former boxing promoter Kelly Maloney and Gender Nebulous podcast presenter Frida Wallace. So, Frida, welcome along and a very happy new year. And also as well, Kelly, how do you feel about these new rules? Do you feel they are fair?
Is that to me?
Yes, sorry, Frida. Yes, it is.
Well, I don't come to this as a sports person. I'm quite willing to listen to Sharron talking about we should follow the science, because I don't follow that kind of... What's interesting to me about this debate is why it's happening now. And there's this kind of... And Sharron has thrown in with some quite transphobic people on Twitter, and that's just a matter of fact. And there's this kind of invasion narrative that trans women are taking over sports and it's going to be a problem for them. It really isn't. You can name them on one hand, maybe, the trans women that are making waves in sport. And also, this isn't a new thing. This goes back to like 1976 when Renee Richards, she was in the US Tennis Open and she played as a trans woman. It didn't create the kind of hysteria that it does now. The reason these things are creating these waves now is because we live in a culture war climate. So somebody like me is seen as the other. You know, you can criticize me based on my otherness. And that's the problem I have with it. I'm all for fairness in sport because it wouldn't make sense if somebody was winning everything. Like if I started... I'm not a sports person, but say if I entered a sports category, I do a bit of swimming and I just started winning everything, how would that benefit me? Because I'm like some kind of... There's no sort of trans superwoman that's winning everything. That's not happening. So I'm not sure
there was the case of Leah Thomas, and I suppose it highlighted...
She wasn't winning everything, Neil.
She wasn't, but it highlighted a problem, I guess, and it was a problem that was like, OK, maybe we need to try and be fair to everyone and inclusive for everyone, but how do we do that so that if you happen to be that person against Leah and you felt it was incredibly unfair, that you know, you trained all your life for that moment. I know, because the numbers obviously clearly, as you quite rightly say, are very small, but we're just trying to make it fair. I mean, do you think the specific one, for example, and the reason we're talking about it today is, of course, because the rules have come into effect today. So say for British Triathlon, there is this open category. Does that seem like common sense to you? Actually, can I bring in you, Kelly? What do you think?
So, yeah, I mean, Frida, you just want to talk about what you were saying there?
Well, yeah, I just, like I said before, I'm interested in it, why the debate is happening all the time now. Like, it just seems to be, whenever they do talk about women's sports now, they don't talk about women's sports. There's always some transgender angle with it. And like Kirsti was saying, it's a political thing. And that's the point I was trying to make to Neil. It's like you really are fussing over... If you wanted to talk about fairness in sport... If you wanted to talk about problems for women in sport, you wouldn't start by looking at trans women. You know what I mean? There's a lot of abuses going on in sports. There's a lot of problems with, you know, the way women are underfunded. So if you wanted to actually have a conversation about fairness for women, you wouldn't be looking at trans women. That would be the last place you'd be looking. So that was my point, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they keep bringing in this Leah Thomas as the example.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like over and over again that example's brought up.
But I think that example comes up a lot because what she called Kelly J. Keane, she actually went over there, didn't she, with her little crew, and she stood at the side of the pool shouting "cheat."
I didn't know that. Is that true? Yeah.
Well, yeah. And imagine travelling all that way just to harangue to do that to athletes. You know, it's disgusting.
Well, imagine being an athlete like I know some people that get a bad email at work and will go sick the next day, you know?
Yeah.
And I know athletes that when they get abused on the field, and I'm not talking about trans athlete, it affects their performance. It can affect their performance so much that it can make them very ill, right? In beyond sport. No one faces more scrutiny and more hate than probably over the last 3 years would have been Laurel Hubbard and Leah Thomas in sport. There's no other athletes in sport that would have faced more online hate.
Yeah, those two names come up all the time.
Yeah. Some people go sick when they get a bad email from their boss. Some athletes get we've had a female athlete here get a bronze statue built because one photo she was like trawled for you know, for a couple of weeks. Leah and Laurel have got this for a few years. Imagine the performance, the effect that has on your performance.
Yeah, the stress of all that kind of media attention on you has got to affect you on it. Yeah.
Well, trainers and coaches tell athletes not to look at the papers, and because of that reason, you know, they like young football. They always tell young footballers now, don't read Twitter.
Yeah. And then like there's just so many, like, the same people are just bringing up the same few trans athletes, right? And that's got to be clear enough proof in its own.
Yeah, in its own right.
You've got to have, if you're going to have, like today on the radio in the UK, they bring up, like on GB News, Fallon Fox as their example of trans women dominating. Like I said at the start here, Fallon hasn't even gotten a ring for 9 years. Fallon's recovering from knee surgery. So much advantage Fallon's got, you know. And they're still talking about, like, CC Telfer, who won a Division 2 NCAA title, you know. Like, I never even knew they had NCAA Division 2 sports until she won a title in it. Like, you know, there's just so much irrational fear, and it's just totally confected, you know.
Yeah, and like you say, it's all politically motivated. It's not based on anything, you know, rational.
Right. So Kelly Maloney's coming into the conversation now. So let's have a listen to her.
Well, I am from the sporting world, and I do believe in fair play and safety first in sport. You know, but you talk about the swimmer. She only won one race. She was in about 8 races that day, and she didn't break any records like you like to say she did. And the New Zealand weightlifter absolutely didn't even qualify after the first round. You have to remember, sport's not just about the physical side; it's also about the mental side. And a trans person goes through a hell of a lot of stuff to get to where they are today, and it affects them mentally. You know, I agree with the WBC's rules, what they come up with. I think that's very good, because that is a sport that you have to have first-class safety. But I think, you know, we will see how the triathlon thing goes. The WBC have obviously set a precedent by setting a trans category, so it's led the way for other sports to follow. It's more of a political decision than a sports decision. But I totally agree. Trans women should not be allowed to box biological women in any form of combat sports. But other sport, I think we have to look at, you know, I listen to Sharron Davies and I respect Sharon's views, and, you know, she's entitled to her opinion, same as we are. But we need more evidence. You know, I work with sports physiologists, and I've got one who's told me, you have a slight advantage, but it depends on how far you are in your transitioning. I know my testosterone level is near enough as low as what Sharron said hers is, because I have my bloods and my testing done every 6 months.
Okay.
So on that issue there, where she's talking about the boxing, where trans women should never be in the same ring as cis women, you know, but as far as I know, boxing has a lot of categories. Based on ability, weight, and all that kind of stuff. So, what do you think about that, Kirsti?
Well, like, number one, we've got to take out of the conversation straight away from number one, and people like Kelly have to, and the OIC have, that stop talking about us as a monolithic community. Now Kelly's gone there and pretty much has supported a blanket ban on trans women in boxing without any science and research, and that disappoints me with Kelly. Because there's no science and research which supports a blanket ban of trans women in any sport, including boxing. It's to suggest to treat us, judges, as a monolithic community is very, very disappointing, and again, it's anti-science. It's the disparity of the individuals which is relevant. The strength, speed, endurance, and or physique of each individual athlete, not monolithically community. So, you know, let's let the science drive this. Let's let the science help us determine the policies. But let's not just come out and blurt out stuff like Kelly just did, because there's no science that supports blanket bans, including in boxing. It must be a case-by-case basis, particularly in sports like boxing, right? I mean, definitely suggest case-by-case basis, you know?
I mean,
because
boxing,
safety
really
is a concern. But, like I said, it's not the source of the disparity, it's the disparity which is important here. Not whether you're trans or cis, it's the disparity in strength, speed, endurance, and or physique, depending on the sport.
I would have thought boxing would have been a really good example, because of its categories, around what you could do with the sport. You know,
actually, but if like a lot of people say, well, a male at the same weight will be on average more powerful than a woman at the same weight in boxing, right? That's why we still have male, female categories.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, but that's because on average, a male has more percentage of muscle mass compared to fat mass and higher hemoglobin levels. They're the three things that minimise.
Yeah.
And so we lose our hemoglobin, we lose our muscle mass, increase fat mass. So there is no reason for women, trans women, not to compete in boxing if there is no difference in ability, no difference in the lean body mass and the hemoglobin levels. There is no concern for safety. Trans women bones aren't stronger than non-trans women bones.
So this is a really good example.
Actual fact that the largest study on bone health of 711 sample size found as a community prior to HRT, trans women have lower bone mineral density at 3 different sites in our body than even cisgender women. So, and there's no such thing as male muscle and female muscle. When it's the same strength when balanced for your height and so there's no such thing as male bones, female bones. There's so much erroneous information being thrown into this conversation, like weights and heights. In sports that don't have a weight and height category, weight and height are examples of tolerable in fairness. Example, in the women's AFL, there could be 100 kilograms difference between the smallest and the lightest player and the heaviest player, and there could be 2 foot difference in height, right? So there's a lot of erroneous information being thrown in here to try and make it look like trans women got different muscles or different bones than women. We don't, right? African American women and women of colour have bone mineral density on average as much as what a cisgender man does, right? So that was a study called Leslie 2012. That alone takes bone density out of the question when we're relating to transgender women in sport. So a lot of erroneous information being thrown into this conversation. Bigger hands, bigger feet, all that type of stuff. Hands and feet are the easiest measurable comparables that you could possibly measure. And for every 6 foot transgender women, we've got to think there's going to be 50 6 foot cisgender women competing with their natural hormone levels, unlike the 6 foot trans women who's competing with lowered hemoglobin, lower testosterone, increased fat mass, and lower muscle mass and lower bone mineral density. So let's talk about the science. Let's talk about the facts. Let's not say it's men competing against women. Let's say it's women competing against trans women that have met policy which mitigates. So let's be honest in this, Sharron Davies. If we're going to really use the science and research like they say they want to, like Kelly and Sharron say, let's really follow the science and research, because I believe in that too. And the science and research clearly shows that trans women do not have an advantage after a period of hormone reduction.
It's like if people scrutinise someone like Sharron Davies in the same way that they scrutinise trans women, I mean, they would find exactly the same discrepancies. And like one of the things I said to someone is like, what are the size? Like you was talking about hands. What are the size of Sharron Davies's hands? Are they like paddles? Is that why she's winning everything?
Well, what they do is they'll get a picture of a trans woman playing, like Hannah Mousey, and they'll wait until she's next to the smallest girl on the field. Right, and they'll focus that. Look at her, and that photo will go all around the world, right? I could show you a zillion photos where girls tower over me and other girls tower over other girls, you know. And Hannah Mousey was never the heaviest or the tallest in the competition. Like Sarah Perkins, an AFLW female player here, was around 135 kilos, 35 kilos more heavier than Hannah, and was actually a star in the leading goal kicker of the competition. No one said that, you know, she was going to squash people and break bones. It was only Hannah, because she was trans. And Hannah never even played in the top league. She only played in an amateur league and wasn't even a star in that. Yeah,
so this kind of argument that they were just, the discussion they were having there around boxing and categories, and I mean, this kind of supports what you were saying earlier about individual assessments, doesn't it? I mean, not generalising. Yeah. We've
like transgender people are probably the least monolithic community in the world. particularly trans athletes, even within trans women athletes. And just look around any, say, female athletes. You look at your own sporting team, there's a foot difference between the tallest and the shortest, right? The same with trans women. Like, I've got trans friends that are 6'6", and I've got trans girlfriends that are not 5 foot.
Yeah.
We are just as diverse as everyone else.
And why wouldn't we be?
And the only things that we have to concentrate on changing are our percentage of fat mass, muscle mass, hemoglobin levels. That is the trans athlete problem solved in a nutshell.
Right, let's continue.
One thing that I'd like to ask is, I guess what is good about this is we can sit down this and we can debate it sensibly and rationally. Sometimes on social media these things get out of control because it just becomes name-calling. But if we can sit down and rationally and talk about these to make sure all parties feel happy. Frida, can I ask you, as a member of the trans community, do you think, how are they reacting to this new policy, say, for triathlon? Do they feel that this feels fair? Does it feel like common sense at play?
Well, it doesn't feel fair because it seems like segregation, and it feels like, well, if I was a sports person, I'm forced to play with men. And I don't have I don't want this to trickle down to the amateur level. I wouldn't want somebody who is trans to suddenly think they can't be involved in sports, because sport is not just about pure science and physicality. It's about striving, being the best person you can be, and being and overcoming things. And I think trans people relate to that because in their daily lives. So when we look at sporting heroes, we're not looking at the stats. We're looking at this person is a great example of somebody that's, fought for what they wanted to achieve in life. And I think there's another layer to the sporting story. So I can understand Sharron Davies saying, we have to look at the science, because there is a sports science. But like I was thinking about, the women's Euros, the Lionesses.
Yep.
If you look at the parity, there were 32-year-old women on the same field as 17-year-olds. 18-year-olds. And I was thinking, well, if you're going to talk about parity, you can't cherry pick. You've got to, if you had to look at sport completely in the sense of science and parity, Sharron Davies wouldn't be allowed to compete because how tall is she? You know what I mean? It's like you'd have to say, well, you're too physically big to be a swimmer because you're going to win everything. Do you know what I mean? So you can't do that.
I think that's.
So it's quite amusing there at the end where you're talking about Sharron Davies, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I don't know if I was correct there, really, but
I like that bit.
Yeah,
I loved how you responded to Sharron then.
Yeah, I thought, but the point you raised about just like your average sports, like local people playing sports, not elite sport, like your local sports team. I mean, what we've been discussing so far is really all around elite sports and the science around that. But when you kind of look at it, like that you just want to go and play football or whatever, your local sports team. Reasons. I mean, these arguments kind of disappear completely, don't they? Because we're not talking about elite sports here.
Well, when we're talking about safety, right? When we're talking about sports, say like rugby union, which is often brought up in the RFU, being over there in England. Mm-hmm. Like when we're talking about sports like that, we should be talking about safety. Right?
Yeah.
And that should be part of the conversation. But if we're talking about safety, why would a sport like World Rugby ban trans women at the elite level, where our opposition are the fittest, the strongest, the most skillful, but then find it suitable to play at the grassroots level if it was a safety thing, where the players are less developed, less strong? Do you think it would be better off to put us in the elite league with the more developed players? You know what I mean? So, and what we've got to look at this too is that, yes, a bigger, stronger trans woman could be an increase to safety in a sport, but so could an equally big and strong cisgender woman. So instead of blanket banning the trans women, we should be seeing that as the proxy then to also ban cisgender women, because if it's truly about safety, let's regulate the disparities in the strength, speed, endurance, and physique. Let's not just use apartheid in sport and segregate people because they're trans or gens or cisgender. So let's, like you were saying in that interview there, that let's look at the actual source, not the source of disparity. Let's look at the disparities in this.
So
because that's the only way that makes sense. We're not monolithically community.
Yeah.
If for every physiometric characteristic in sport, there is a complete overlap between males and females, right? For every category, for height, weight, testosterone levels, bone mineral density, for every characteristic in sport, right, there's a complete crossover between male and female athletes. And the difference within each category, male and female, like the average difference, the global difference in height between males and females is only a few inches, right? But the difference between a Dutch woman, the average Dutch woman, and the average Indonesian woman is over a foot difference, right?
Yeah.
So the difference between the shortest and tallest woman or man is in feet, whereas the average difference is in inches. The same in weight, and for every characteristic you can possibly imagine. So to monolithically ban us and to ban a trans woman that can, without any doubt, prove without any doubt that she doesn't have a disparity, how can that be a logical decision? It's a totally illogical position to be.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about here is, when we'll be talking about safety and inclusion and science. So how do you kind of categorize those as what's more important, inclusion, safety, or science? How do you categorize those, Kirsti?
I believe that the starting point should be work health and safety.
Right.
So, so those should be the things that we look at first, which is what the OIC and the AFL have recommended. So, safety should be paramount, the number one, and safety is to be truthful with safety. We've got to look at the disparities that already exist in the sport, not just the trans disparities that are coming along. So if we're going to worry about disparities of trans women's weight, we've got to take into consideration of weight of all the players in that competition. You know what I mean? Not just the trans one. So really, safety should be number one. It should be led by the science, and inclusion must take place. Like it's up to the international federations to prove someone hasn't got an advantage. Like it's not up to the individual athletes. It's impossible for me to prove that I don't have an advantage to everyone else. It's up to the sport to prove. And until such time as the sport can show there's an advantage, inclusion must be the number one priority.
Yeah. I mean, it just disappoints me that this is the way the debate goes, because if I was a trans athlete myself, I wouldn't want to face the media. It would be the media that would put me off wanting to be an athlete. It wouldn't be my abilities. I know I'd be going into a bear pit every time I competed, and I think and that is an awful situation to put somebody in. Now everybody is scrutinized when they're famous or when they're in the media, but it just seems like when I saw what happened to Emily Bridges, the cyclist, I thought that was awful. It's just absolutely crushing for that person. So imagine a young cyclist coming up who happens to be trans. You might look at that and go, I don't want to get involved in that because I'm just going to get hated.
Well, I lay a lot of blame on the sporting bodies for this, and the OIC first and foremost, because they've got a lot of money, right, and a lot of resources, and they developed the first trans policy in 2003. And there was very little follow-up education. In 2015, they threw the new policy on the table. And once again, the World War II hit. And it's been 7-8 years since the OIC have finally now stepped in and started to help educate. But they threw this on the table. And it's great, sports develop all these policies, beautiful. But you must have follow-up and support mechanisms along the way to support the trans athletes that are playing the game, right? So there's got to be support prior, So before, during, and after. It's not just create a policy and hope that it succeeds. Let's create policy and then create living, working, breathing policies that can be amended and tweaked, when needed, when the science comes in or more improved science arises,
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
There's a lot to this conversation. That's just
There is.
We've covered a lot, though, haven't we, today? So
I think it's been brilliant.
Great.
And
yeah.
So let's just finish off. Let's finish off the video, and then we can kind of do a wrap up at the end. Yeah. Okay.
It's the last bit of the video.
That's rather different, isn't it? That I have to say. And Kelly, what do you feel about what Frida said there? As someone who's been involved in sport,
I agree with your view on that. Sport is sport. We have categories in sport. And someone, you do get tall women, you do get smaller women, you do get taller men. You take heavyweight boxing. Lennox Lewis, who I looked after, he was 6'6" and nearly 17.5 stone. He could fight someone that was 13.5 stone or 14 stone and maybe 6 foot. That's just all human bodies are different, but.
That's kind of what I was saying. Sorry, I just so my point of view is because
no such thing as a level playing field in sport. Referring to Sharron Davies has got quite big shoulders. She is a very powerful woman, and she's a good swimmer. But she has trained for that. You have to remember, sports people train for all their life, and it's also, as I said earlier, it's a mental thing as well with sport. You drive yourself on to achieve something, and we have opposite sides. We have scientists who say there is no advantage. We need the scientists to get around the table and discuss this fairly. We can't use the trans community as a football to be kicked about by, say, right-wing politicians, anti-trans people. I'm all for sitting around the table and talking and discussing, and whatever comes out right, if the science comes out right, what Sharron says, 100%, then we go with that. If the science comes out right that trans women don't have an advantage, then we should go with that.
Kelly, thank you. It's been very interesting hearing all your thoughts tonight, and Sharron's as well. And this is something that isn't going to be sorted out today for sure, but at least discussions have started and moves have been made. Thank you. Frida, thank you very much. Kelly, thank you very much. I wish you both a very happy new year. That'd be a good start.
So, that's the end of the video there. So I guess in conclusion, they the conversation was around let the science lead us. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, definitely science is going to help. Science definitely, is needed to help improve things, but we've got enough science now that clearly shows that blanket banning trans women in any sport in the world does not make any scientific, legal, or ethical sense, or sporting sense. That's what we know without a fact. And like I said, the OIC have just spent 2.5 years, and they didn't suggest a blanket ban on any sport whatsoever. The OIC and the OIC had medical experts, human rights experts, athletes, cisgender, transgender. And like I said, they never come out with a single bit of study. If the science existed that categorically showed that we had an advantage, it'd be out there and everyone would be aware of it. No one's aware of it, so it doesn't exist.
So it's like every time there is a prominent sports person who happens to be trans, we have to have this same debate over and over again. So when the Olympics comes round or the Commonwealth Games or any big sporting event, if there is one trans woman, even if she's just not even competing at the top, if she's just part of that event, that is what everybody focuses on, and it takes.
Well, Frida, today it was reported in the British media that the World Athletics are looking at not banning trans women. They're going to have the policy now down to 2.5 nanomoles, and then the headlines in the paper are World Athletics are going to allow transgender women to compete. Not that the headline should have been trans women have been allowed to compete in World Athletics events since 2003, and none of them have even been ranked in the top 200 for any event in the last 20 years. Yeah. And now, even though that fact they've underperformed, we're going to make it even harder for these trans women and lower the testosterone down to 2.5 and make them extend the time by double the time. You know, that should have been the headline, not the way they've written it today in the British media is like World Athletics are just granting us permission to play sport now. That was granted back in 2003.
Well, the British media is pretty much corrupt
The
now.
British media is nonsense.
Terrible.
So
There's very few publications now that you used to be able to rely on a few of them, like the Times maybe or the Guardian for correct information, but now they seem to have all gone down.
Well, you know, the UK has got. I don't know hardly any really good sports reporters in the UK.
Right.
That's something that you really lack a lot of ability in your continent over there. Whereas Australia, we're leaders in this stuff. I think, you know, that's probably had a lot to do that you haven't had good, proper sports journalists to call this stuff out. In the UK, you've had people that have had a monopoly on the media over there, people like Sean Ingle. And then his story gets printed in the Daily Mail and repeated here and there. And like people like Sean Ingle totally ignore the science and research and write a lot of false stuff as well. So, my heart goes out to the UK. I'm really disappointed in the government. I'm disappointed in people like Sharron Davies.
Terrible.
But, I'd say to people, if it's politicians pushing this stuff, don't listen. You know it's not true. Reach out to organisations like the OIC, who are the leaders in global sport, and they've had policies for over 20 years in this. It's totally confected outrage. The gender reforms in England have got nothing to do with sports participation. Not one sport in the world requires a gender reform certificate now or ever. So that's just another thing they're thrown in there.
Yeah, well,
It's got nothing to do with the reforms in Scotland, nothing.
Well, everything's just a kind of performative kind of, you know, the way, like you said, it's completely political, the debate now. It's not based in science. So that's where we're at with it. Is there anything else we've not? Is there anything we haven't covered, Vicky?
I think we've covered a lot of ground there with, you know, sports. I mean, I'm kind of curious, Kirsti, is the final thing that we're going to talk about is how do you see this situation being resolved going forward? What's your kind of, you know, vision for the future and how we can get beyond all this nonsense?
If sports would sit back, look at this new OIC guidelines, new framework, I really hope the OIC, and they said they will start a big education program on how to implement this new OIC framework, because the OIC framework has pretty much got the answers in there if you follow the OIC 10-point framework. So I would recommend the sports, I really hope that they follow those guidelines. I hope that we move away from this more and more from this monolithic thinking and we move away from blanket testosterone levels. And and we start having a lot more follow-up education when policies are announced, because that's been severely lacking in a lot of it. So it's great that sports are developing policies. It's great that sports are having pride rounds and all this stuff, but there's no point in developing a policy for trans women or trans athletes if you're going to leave them out on a limb like they've done to Laurel Hubbard and what they've done. You know, there's no support mechanism in there. By all means, you should be able to criticise the sciences all day. You know, and I fully support anyone attacking the science. But hey, let's leave the individuals alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us because, your Twitter feed has been a mine of information for me. And I hope you're going to keep that up and keep putting things out there. So it's just great.
Yeah, it's going to get bigger. We're working on actually creating a global website, a global Transport Alliance website, where we'll be looking to put the research, putting our allies stuff up there, putting the policies and Q&A stuff. And I'm back stronger than ever. I'm ready to fight alongside you people in the UK to help. And I'm not going to give up on this conversation till everyone, my trans brothers and sisters and non-binary family can ride a bike, kick a ball, or run around a lap without being abused, and
that's great.
So I'll never give up. I'm going to keep going till we can all play.
Thanks for coming on today and having a chat with us. It's been really informative. If there's any developments in the future in the sports kind of arena, we'd love to have you back on. We can talk again about changes or new policies or whatever.
I'd be honoured. I love your podcast.
Thank you.
I'd be honoured to be on it.
So any final
Maybe
comments?
Maybe we'll get Sharron Davies on there with us one day. Face to face with her.
No, we've tried. I've tried to do conversations with TERFs, and they never seem to want to talk to me. So.
Yeah.
It would be good to get you on, Kirsti, with Sharron. We can do a head to head.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah, we'll see if we can do that. I'm not sure it's going to work, but we'll have a go. So, Frida, have you got any final words you want to say on this topic before?
No, I just want to thank Kirsti for doing it, because this is the kind of information we need out there.
Yeah.
It's so confusing.
It's a very confusing topic. I mean, the science is kind of it's very specific, and if you don't know it, you don't know it. You've really got to kind of.
I know, and once people can learn about it, the attitudes change. So that's the best thing.
And I hope we can.
What's been regulated and how it's been regulated. Normally, attitudes change.
But I hope we can support trans athletes.
For a man to compete against a woman, it just takes away any legitimate chance of having a respectful conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I'll sign us off there. And to our dear listeners, please subscribe, please like, please come back again and listen to more of our conversations. And we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.